Hey guys, Phil here with another kind of more long form video, and today what we're going to talk about is GraphQL and using it in your Ruby on Rails app to provide an API. What we're going to do is create something that looks like this, which isn't much because it's an API, so what does it look like? You're going to be using GraphQL with Rails, and we're going to be using this cool looking GraphIQL interface to test out our API, and we'll even be using curl perhaps. This is all based on a book that I've got out, an ebook that you can buy on Gumroad, and it comes with the source code for this, and you can get all the goodies there. And this is all about using GraphQL and Rails, and it's a step-by-step guide. This video is not going to cover everything that's in the book, but it's just going to give you an overview. Let's talk a little bit. I'm not going to talk about what GraphQL is. I think you probably know what that is. It was created by Facebook in 2012, open sourced in 2015, and it's a query language, the QL, for APIs along with a server-side runtime. And so why GraphQL? The first one is, of course, that it's flexible. Your clients can get exactly what they want out of the GraphQL query. And what I've always found with RESTful APIs is that you need to call this one and then this one to get the things that you need, and you have to mix it together. That is not true with GraphQL. With GraphQL, you can construct the query so that you get everything you need in one call. And of course, because of that, that's point number 2, is that it's reduced the number of round trips to the server. And because we're getting everything in one call and we can deal with these n+1 queries, your applications are just much more efficient. Point number 3 that's great is that it's strongly typed. Clients can query, or what do you call it? Introspect the schema, and you can see exactly what you're going to get back. Is it a string? Is it an int? Whatever it is, it's strongly typed, and that helps so much. If you've ever used a RESTful API that is just like, what is this that's coming back? Nobody really seems to know. And the 4th point that's cool is that you can have evolvable APIs. Versioning is quite easy. Not so easy with the RESTful API, in my opinion. And so those are the 4 points that are great about GraphQL. It's flexible, reduced load on the server, it's strongly typed, and it's versionable easily. It's a lot of community support, just like Rails. There's a lot of community support for GraphQL, and the performance. Rails, when used with GraphQL, can be optimized to reduce the n+1 query problems, and you end up with a much more efficient and performant application. So let's create our own GraphQL application. So I've got my Rails environment all set up, and we're simply going to switch over to the computer now, I hope, and we're going to do a Rails new, and let's call this my GraphQL app, and we're going to do it with a database of PostgreSQL. Yikes. I'm sorry, you're going to have to watch me type. And we're not going to include the testing framework. We are going to be talking about testing in this, but we're going to use our specs. We can do a -t here. And so let's get this thing going. I don't have any coffee. That's going to be a problem. Look at that. Rails 708. Interesting. Okay, let's get into it, into the directory, I mean. And, I'm in love with .env, so we're going to use .env Rails. And that should be good for now, I think. Oh, yeah. And then we're going to use Faker because we're going to create some stuff. Bundle, add Faker to the group of development. Actually, maybe development and test. And we're good to go. So just gonna open this in VS Code, shrink it down. Oops. And let's touch the .env file. Let's touch the Docker compose.yaml file. And let's quickly get those going. Not going to really talk about this. I talk about this so many times. Let's change these ports to something else. Port number 2. 2. There we go. That's all we need for the .env. And let's get the Docker compose. Now go away. There we go, our Docker compose. Standard stuff, you know how many hundreds of times I've talked about on this YouTube channel about that. And the database. And just need these. We're going to chuck those into development and into test. We're not going to release this to production, so we're just going to leave that like it is. And we should be able to run a db prepare. And it works better if you start the Docker compose and then do the db prepare. There we go. Good to go. Our app is done, so now we can actually start talking about the implementing GraphQL. In the book, you can get a lot of history about GraphQL, comparison of GraphQL and REST, some of the pros and cons, all the advantages of GraphQL over a REST network. That's all in the book. I'm not going to talk about that here. Here we're talking about actually doing it. So let's bundle add GraphQL. And then you know what's interesting? This has never happened to me before, but there's a gem that I could not install from the command line. I don't know why. It's like it's getting the wrong version or something. I don't know. Anyway, so I had to do this. GraphQL Rails. Just put it in your gem file. Let's bundle, and then we need to do the installer, and the installer is going to generate a ton of stuff, and this is pretty interesting. It's so robust, the GraphQL gem and the development, really handy. And so, wow, look at all this stuff. Look at it all. Creates the types, mutations. It creates a controller that handles all the requests. Puts the post, the root in, which it's pretty much ready to go. And creates a GraphQL directories, all of it. So what do we want to do? First, of course, we want to create some actual models and so on. I'm going to be using the rather boring construct of a user who has posts and their comments on those posts. Sorry. Not so original. So we're going to set all of those up. And then let's quickly go in and set up the has many's. Has many posts, has many comments. I'm not many. Come on, comments. Okay, that's all we need for you. And if we go and look at post It belongs to user, but it also has many comments. Destroy. I should have put that there. Okay. And the comment is fine, just belongs to user and post. And let's create some seed data. Get rid of that. So pretty quickly, just going to use Faker to create some users and then some posts, just so we have some stuff in there. And then finally we can just run the seed. Rails DB seed. There we go. Hopefully. Great. So if we wanted, just to show you that I've got it all there, we're going to take a look at user count. We've got 10 of them. Got 10 posts in there. So it's all great. So let's talk about types. So types are what GraphQL uses as the contract between the client and the server. They dictate what kind of objects can be queried and manipulated, and by defining the types, you're providing the set of rules that guide and validate the data transfer between the client and the server. And so what we need to do is create a type for everything that we're going to transfer. So you can do this from the command line. So, we're going to send back a user. So let's generate a GraphQL object for the user. Let's generate one for the post. And let's generate one for the comment. And then let's go and take a look at what we've got. Specifically, we'll take a look at the user type. And so what it does, it goes off, I guess it looks at the database or it looks at the schema file from the database, and says these are the fields in the object, and these are what we're going to be sending back. Perhaps you're going to say, well, I would never send something back. You can delete it from here. So it's got the ID, the name, and the email. But of course we have this other thing, which is the posts. So we can add some custom fields as we want. Post count, for instance, which would be an integer, and we can add even the posts themselves, and they are going to be type of the post type. So that, like we said off the top, GraphQL is strictly typed. So that means that this field that we're returning of posts is an array of the types of post type. So we can go through pretty much this thing is running. We've configured a GraphQL app already, I believe. We'll find out in a minute. So let's run the server. Let's go over here and create, I don't even know where the edge of the stupid browser is. It's there. There it is. And does anybody remember? There it is. It's a URL. So remember, we haven't had to do anything. We haven't had to put in a root. We haven't had to write a controller. We haven't done anything. We just ran the generate for that, and we put in our types. And it'd be even better if you went to GraphQL. Now that maybe I needed to put in myself. Nope, there it is. So GraphQL is, a browser facing workspace, sandbox, whatever you want to call it, to let you generate GraphQL queries and see the stuff that comes back. I want to say that to use GraphQL, you can't have a Rails app that you did with the -- API switch because it needs things like the CSS and all the rest of that. You're running a Rails app. So it's a bit unfortunate, actually, because normally if you were doing something that only generated data over the over GraphQL API, you would just create a Rails API application, but you can't if you want to use this sandbox. It's a shame. So let's, let's do our first query. So we can say query, and we're going to get our users. And what do we want to see? Let's see the email, the name, and the posts count. This should work. And it doesn't work because I missed the type. Hopeless. So let's go back. And if we go to query types, because of course it doesn't know what we're doing, I'm going to delete all this stuff. This is just all the sample code that it gives you in a query type, which we don't need. So we've got a query type, and let's get all the users. Okay? Look at me writing a comment here. So it's pretty simple. We have a field of users. You know how we did that on the posts, on the users object? Well, now we're on a specific query type object, which is the overseeing thing. We're saying we have a field of users, and what is that? And so you can write just plain old Ruby code, users, and it says, get me all the users. So let's do that, and while we're here, get a user by the ID, and that's just a single user. So before we had this is an array, this is just a single one, and we're going to pass in an argument of an ID, which is a type of ID, which is one of the query types. And what is that? What is user with an ID? It simply goes out, finds the user, and returns it. So those are our queries that we've set up. Okay, so I missed something. That's why post count didn't work. I didn't define the field. I said this field of post count, but of course I didn't tell it what it was. For posts, it works because that's an association on the user object. Post count is not on the user object, so that's a good point. Inside of these type definitions, you can create fields that are only returned in the query. They're not actually on the object. They're not inside of Rails. They're only on the API, which is pretty cool, and it's not something I think you can do with the RESTful API. So if you're creating an API, let's say for a customer, and the customer wants some specific information that you don't want to have inside of your Rails app, you can just create it on here. So we've got post count, and now if I run post count, and how about, post count, let's just fix that, there we go. And it changes snake case to camel case. So there we go. That's our first GraphQL API call. Now, a concept inside of GraphQL, this is a query gets stuff, and a mutation, it's difficult to come up with good names. So a mutation is like an RESTful thing in the CRUD, when we're putting or posting or deleting, anything that changes something on the other side, that's a mutation in the language of GraphQL. So if we wanted to be able to create users, for instance, we would need to create some mutations. So we're going to go to our mutations and our mutation type, and let's see, mutation type, where is that? Here it is. I'm going to get rid of all that. And so what we want to do is create a user. And it's a mutation of type create user, so we need to create that. So we're going to create a create user mutation. And I'm not going to type it in because you've all seen how I type. Looks like that. So we go in, again, we set the arguments, and I kind of love this typing actually. So we set the arguments, we say, what fields we're going to return, which is user and errors, and it does this resolve method when something is posted to it. And you got 2 arguments there, name and an email, and we just kind of do some standard stuff just like you were inside of a normal controller. Think of this as a controller, really. And it does the new, and then it returns. So that means that if we wanted to create a user, where are you? Sorry, gotta go to my thing. We can test it out. Let's take a look at that. Let's get rid of the query, and this time we're going to create a mutation. And this mutation is the, I didn't re-query the API. We got to create user mutation, and it takes some input. Of course, the syntax is something you have to learn. And it's a name of Rails test. Boy, that's exciting. And it has an email of rails.test@test.com. And then you say we want to return a user because we want to see what ID it got. And just for fun, let's see his email so we know who we're talking about. So if we do this, if we go over here and look at the stack, okay, let's do it. See, it's created the user, it's returned a user of ID of 11, that. And we can see that it hit the GraphQL controller, it did an execute, and then it inserted into the Rails. So it goes off and does all of this automatically, I like to say. And so we've just, in however fast, this is like going to be one of my short videos, we've got GraphQL into the application. We've done a query which pulls data. We've done a mutation which pushes data. So let's do one more sophisticated kind of thing, and that's using authorization or authentication. And we're going to do that using JWT, which is JSON Web Tokens. So let's close everything up here. Let's go to our gem file and add the JWT in here. And bundle. So we've bundled, we've added JWT, and then you remember that we didn't have a password field on our users, so let's add a password digest field. And the reason we're using password digest is because we're going to use a handy dandy Rails has secure password. So we can go to the user has secure password, and that's it. That will use a hashed field to save the password. So now we want to change our create user, right? Because we're going to pass in a password. So we need an argument of password, and we're going to create the user with the password. That's all we need to do. That is done. So now we should be able to create a password test account, password test, and it failed to create. Oh, I know why. Didn't start the server. didn't pass in a password. Isn't it great to see mistakes in real life? So, wonderful password, 123. I'm going to refresh that. Wonderful password. There we go. Wonderful password, 123. Oh, hopeless. This is why you guys watch me, is to see somebody make mistakes, right? That's what somebody told me. Here we go. Not valid JSON. Again, watch my mistakes, people. Using active model has secure password. Uncomment this line. All right, I'm going to uncomment the line. I'm going to run bundle. I'm going to run the server. And I'm going to click this friggin' button, and it's going to work. There we go. It's created a user. Create the user, put in the password digest. You can see the password digest is, well, it's all filtered out. So we've created that user. So now, let's do some stuff, real world stuff here. We're going to create a login. So a login is a kind of mutation for some reason. Well, I guess it's changing, isn't it? It's changing the user. So let's, first of all, we're going to, to our mutation types, we're going to add a field of login. And it'll be a mutation of login. So let's go over here. Let's create a new mutation of login.rb. I'm not going to type it in. There it is. Pretty simple. It takes the email and the password, finds the user, checks that the password matches, and then generates a JWT, a JSON web token. You know, I've spent the last 8 years running and ZonMaster, creating and running ZonMaster. And we obviously deal with the Amazon API, and everything is about JSON web tokens and tokens, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. So you're really kind of seeing how the big boys do it, you know, once you use GraphQL. Quite enlightening. So we've got our login, and that means that we can go back and let's refresh. This time we're going to change this to be login. And we know that we don't need the name, we just need an email and a password, and it's not returning that, it's returning a token. Isn't it amazing how it knows all of that? So let's log in. Here we are, we've gotten our token. And what's that? Grammarly. God, I hate Grammarly. So now we've gotten a web token back. What we can do, and this is pretty cool, is we can go over to the controller that they gave us. So this is the controller that comes when you generate a GraphQL install. And it says here, you've got this context here. And we can do stuff. It says, you know, query context goes here for example current user and so on. So we can say, let's get the current user, and we're going to get the current user from a token. And so how do we do that? We need to have this, we'll add this little method at the bottom, which gets current user from a token, and it reads the header. And so if you've ever used Postman or anything like that, you know, when you had to deal with authentication, same thing. So it reads the authorization header, decodes that token using the my secret, which is, you know, the incredible thing that I used over there, and then it finds the user because we've encoded the user ID. If we go back and look at login, again, here's my secret, you know, we could change this to be Phil's secret code. And that means then over here, we have to change this to fill secret code. And we are encoding the user ID as user ID. So when we decode, we pull out the user ID from the decoded token. Simple, actually. So let's log in again. We got a new token, and then we can use curl to show that it's working. So this is the curl command, and what it does, I don't think that's the right port, oh, is it? 92. Goes off, and we're doing a query of get us user ID 1 and show us his email, his or her email. And here's where we would paste in the token. So let's get the token from here. Oh my god, Grammarly is just the biggest piece of crap. There's the token. I'm going to paste that token in. And now let's just... And that didn't work. And it didn't work because can't verify CSRF. We don't need to do that kind of CSRF stuff on here because we're doing our own authorization. We don't need to worry about the cross-site stuff. So as it says in a comment right at the top of the GraphQL controller, if you're accessing this from outside the domain, just nullify the session. So we're going to get rid of that, protect from forgery. Let's clear that, and let's run it again. And my goodness, there's the data. So that's my quick look at GraphQL with Rails. As I've said, I've got the PDF on Gumroad that goes into a lot more detail. It goes into some stuff about roles. It goes into the history. And you get all the code that I've been using. So just pop over to Gumroad and pick that up. But I really loved doing this, you know. This particular episode is something that's really new to me, using GraphQL to create an API. And as soon as I started going through and doing the stuff for this video, I thought, wow, I could really be using this. I've got 2 other live sites that I thought, you know, I'm using an API now that's a RESTful API. I think GraphQL would fix some problems that we're having with that API. And it's just much more modern. It feels fresh and it feels right. And if you're dealing with other kinds of front ends like React and so on that want to send back JSON, certainly I think GraphQL is the way to go. Hope you've enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and come back for more videos. See you soon.